Let's start in the 16th century. In around 1593, Shakespeare wrote a play called Richard III. It follows Richard as he kills his family members and acquaintances as he tries to become the King of England. A notable quality of Richard, however, is his physical deformity. He is described in the play as being hunchbacked and having a withered arm. In the opening soliloquy, Richard says, "Since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain, and hate the idle pleasures of these days." Here, we see the social model of disability at play as Richard laments the fact that society doesn't accept his deformed appearance. The social model of disability is a fairly modern way to view disability, and states that people are disabled not by their disability, but instead by society. It is the idea that people might have differences, but the way that society was built means that there are more barriers for some than others. Though the term social model did not exist back then, we can still see how it applies in the play. This line suggests that Richard only cannot prove a lover because women don't view him as someone who they can engage romantically with. If only the women ignored his appearance and allowed him to court them like all other men, Richard would not be at a disadvantage. This bitterness then gives him a reason to become the villain of the story. The play is also set in 15th century England, and religion was a central part of their lifestyle. In one scene, while Richard and another character, Queen Margaret, hurl insults at each other, she calls him a slave of nature and the son of hell, a slander of thy mother's womb. This is the religious model of disability at play, as Queen Margaret says that Richard's appearance indicates that he has come from hell. This implies that his deformities are a punishment for his mother from God. The religious model of disability is a model of disability that uses religion to explain disabilities. It is one of the oldest models of disability, and though the way it explains disability can vary, a common one is that the disfigurement is a blessing or punishment from God. Oftentimes, the reasons for the punishment are that it is a result of the individual's sin, or even a result of their mother's sin. In another scene, Richard accuses Queen Elizabeth of conspiring his death using his arm as an example of it. He claims that she is responsible for its shriveled appearance and says, "Look how I am bewitched. Behold, mine arm is like a blasted sapling withered up." Here, he suggests that his deformity is a result of a curse, an example of the religious model again. This is also an example where bodily monstrosity comes into play. Bodily monstrosity is an old model that notes the existence of bodily differences but gives no explanation to them since it existed so long ago. An example is Ambrose Paré's book of Monsters and Marvels, which contains drawings such as these, documenting people with deformities. It is a way of thinking about disability that would eventually turn into what we know as the medical model of disability. Think of it as the predecessor. The current medical model of disability is based off of modern medicine and states that because of your disability, you have a lower quality of life. Therefore, you must see a doctor so that they can diagnose you and help fix the problem, whether through physical or medical means. Your disability is a problem, and without intervention, you cannot have a good life. Finally, in the play, Richard tries to court Queen Anne, a seemingly impossible task when you realize that Richard has killed her husband and her father-in-law. Yet, when Lady Anne initially refuses to take his hand in marriage, he cites that she knows no rules of charity which renders good for bad, blessings for curses. Here, he invokes the idea of charity, indicating that because of his disability, Lady Anne should pity him and allow him to marry her. This idea of charity is another common theme that goes along with the religious model of disability, since it is oftentimes written into religious texts. The concept of charity says that people should be charitable to the disabled. It suggests that in society, non-disabled people should be caring for the disabled, since they are in a more disadvantaged position. Richard uses this as part of his argument, and because of this, his wooing eventually wins Lady Anne over. Because Richard III is such an early example of disability represented in the media, it has influenced later depictions of disability, setting up many core ideas that have carried on through the centuries. By analyzing how disability is represented in Richard III, we can examine, too, the ways in which disability is portrayed in the modern media, and how it has changed since the 16th century. In 2016, a movie called Me Before You came out. It stars some pretty big names such as Sam Claflin and Emilia Clarke, or as you might know them, Finnick Odair from The Hunger Games and Daenerys Targaryen from The Game of Thrones. They star as Louisa Clark, a completely unqualified caregiver, and Will Traynor, a former businessman who was paralyzed in a motorcycle accident. While Will is bitter and unhappy, Louisa is the opposite, eccentric, bright, and peppy. Louisa, who is in need of money to support her family, gets a job as a caregiver for Will, whose family is quite wealthy. But her real job, as she finds out, is suicide watch. Turns out, Will has given his family 6 months before he takes his own life via assisted suicide. This movie views disability through the medical model of disability. The film places heavy emphasis on Will's lower quality of life and uses it as the reason that he chooses assisted suicide. The movie repeatedly shows clips from his life before the accident as a contrast to who he is today. They show flashbacks to him having fun in the sun with his friends, jumping off cliffs into clear blue water, and traveling the world. In contrast, he now constantly becomes sick. His nurse has a long list of conditions that he has, including autonomic dysreflexia, and despite putting everything into physical therapy the first year, he has only regained slight control over 2 fingers. By showing everything that reduces his quality of life, the movie uses the medical model of disability to say that since Will suffered a spinal cord injury, and a spinal cord injury is ultimately permanent and the doctors can't fix it, it means that he can no longer have a good life. We can see in the modern example a fairly simple representation of disability, using almost exclusively the medical model. This is the modern version of bodily monstrosity that is present in Richard III. The message follows a similar one as well, indicating that the disability is only negative. Though there are clear indications in Me Before You of Will's parents as well as Louisa investing time and money to do fun things despite his disability, which is a part of the social model, in the end, the message is clear. His disability makes his life not worth living. Next is an example of the religious model of disability. The movie Children of a Lesser God is a film adaptation of the play which depicts the romance between a teacher at a school for the hard of hearing and a janitor. The teacher, John, who is hearing, is initially there for a new job to teach speech, but soon falls in love with a deeply unhappy janitor, Sarah, who refuses to use speech to communicate. He soon finds out that she was a talented graduate from this very school and tries to get her to start speaking instead of using sign language. The result is a failed relationship due to John's fundamental misunderstanding of why Sarah doesn't want to speak. While not directly referenced in the movie, the title, Children of a Lesser God, implies that the students who are hearing impaired come from a lesser God. It suggests that due to a hearing impairment, there are not only unequal to those who are hearing, but even less than those who are hearing. The concept of charity also plays a role, as John initially takes it upon himself to help Sarah with her situation because he sees himself as a bridge between her world and the hearing world. By trying to get her to speak, he believes that he is helping her better her life. This theory is proved false, as it becomes clear that she has made the choice to use only sign language herself. This proves a fundamental idea wrong, that all forms of charity are helpful. When we look at Richard III, he uses charity as a way to manipulate people. Yet, in the modern example, we see an example of charity being unwelcomed. From this, we can also see a shifting representation of the religious model of disability. Instead of an emphasis on true religious explanations for disabilities like in Richard III, it instead focuses on the societal implications of such preconceived notions. Instead of using curses and witchcraft as a reason for disability, the movie looks at society's perceptions of those who are hard of hearing. This, in turn, combines the religious model with the social model of disability. Especially for Sarah, her unwillingness to face society comes directly from a fear of leaving the familiarity of the school. These two examples show how Richard III set a precedent for how disability is represented in modern media. What is remarkable about Richard III as the original example for disability representation is its ability to use all 3 models of disability to create a well-rounded character, especially since the idea of the social model of disability had not been officially identified yet. Even Me Before You and Children of a Lesser God are only examples of how the medical and social model are used separately as an explanation for large plot points. However, the downside is that Richard III's use of disability as an excuse for villainy or bitterness has carried through until today. Unfortunately, when you think about it, there are lots of disabled villains, such as Captain Hook, Darth Vader, and the Joker, all of which use disability as the reason for their evilness. It's a theme that's all too common. However, changing times also means changing views on disability, and increasing awareness of the problematic depictions of disability means that there have also been some strides made in changing that. Take the ABC show Speechless. This show follows a family with 3 kids who have just moved to a new school district to accommodate the oldest, JJ, who has cerebral palsy. It is the 6th school that they have tried in the past 2 years, but the mother, Maya, is determined that this one will work, since they're providing JJ with an aide. He is nonverbal, which means that the aide is the one who will be his voice. Right from the start, they encounter a problem with the school, in that they don't have a ramp in the front. This is a problem for JJ, who uses a wheelchair, and becomes a point of contention for Maya right away. This is a social model of disability at play. The lack of a ramp is the barrier that is preventing JJ from entering the school like everyone else. It pushes the idea that the school was not designed to include people like JJ. The show continues to showcase the social model of disability, as nearly every episode shows Maya trying to find a way for JJ to experience as typical of a high school experience as possible, including staying on top of classes, finding a girlfriend, and attending dances. Through all the episodes, the central theme remains constant. There are always ways for JJ to accomplish anything, as long as the right resources are there. This includes finding an aide who fits him, not the hipster old lady that the school initially provided him with, and adapting his speech board with words he wants to use. At the same time, JJ is held to the same standards as his peers, getting called out when he cheats on tests, taking extra classes when he falls behind on school, and participating in extracurricular activities. Though the show uses the same models of disability as Richard III, it paints an entirely new idea about disability, in that it is merely a part of life. Instead of using disability as an excuse, Speechless shows that you can have a good show starring a person with disabilities without using it as the reason that the person becomes evil or to gain pity. Though media is starting to stray from the harmful stereotypes that Richard III started, it's important to remember that there are still many, many instances where there is still ignorance surrounding the way that people with disabilities are represented in the media. That doesn't mean that you can't enjoy watching Batman or Avatar or anything of that sort. But just remember to also take into account how it chooses to represent disability.